The trip to the cemetery. I hesitated for a long time before writing any of this down, not because I was afraid people would laugh at me, though that was reason enough, and not because, deep down, I still wanted to believe that what happened that day could be explained away by exhaustion, a nervous breakdown, coincidence, or some feverish teenage imagination. No, the real reason was something else. Whenever I tried to remember that day properly, not in fragments, not in quick flashes of horror before sleep, but step by step, from beginning to end, something inside me would tighten all over again. That same sticky, suffocating fear would come back. It wasn't ordinary fear either. It wasn't the kind that makes you scream or run right away. It was the kind that numbs you first, as if your soul itself retreats to the farthest corner of your body and refuses to move. And still, I'm writing. I'm writing because silence didn't help. I'm writing because time erased nothing. I'm writing because no matter how often people told me to let the past go, to forget and move on, I knew the past hadn't let go of me. It stayed there, at that old cemetery, beyond the tree line, and at the same time, it somehow followed me home. Sometimes I think I carried it back with me, in my clothes, in my hair, under my fingernails, in my memory itself. Like swamp mud, you don't notice until it starts to smell. It happened in the fall, a year and a half ago. The day was gray, cold, damp, the kind that seeps into your bones. The sky hung low overhead like a dirty, wet sheet. The air smelled of rotting leaves, wet bark, and wood smoke from somebody's burn pile out on the edge of town. The ground had already soaked up weeks of rain, and every step on the dirt road made a sucking sound. In weather like that, everything looks abandoned, even when life is going on all around it. And our side of town looked half abandoned, even on good days. I was 17 then. My friends were around the same age. Mike was tall, awkward, with the constant half smirk of someone who never seemed entirely sure whether he was joking or serious. Jason was loud, always with his phone in his hand, the kind of guy who filmed everything and later stitched it into ridiculous videos. And me, I was the kind of person who goes along not because he truly wants to, but because he doesn't want to be the one left out. It's funny looking back, how many stupid decisions in life are made not out of courage or even stupidity, but out of the simple desire not to look scared. That day we were killing time near some old sheds past the last row of houses, wandering around the empty lot, kicking tin cans, arguing about something so pointless I can't even remember what it was now. We were bored, so bored that boredom itself felt almost physical, like fog. That's the state people are in when they come up with ideas they regret later. It was Mike who suggested it. He was sitting on a concrete slab by a collapsing fence, peeling a cobweb off his sleeve, when he said it in the most ordinary tone, as if he were suggesting we walk to the store for soda. Let's go check out the old cemetery. Jason laughed right away. The one past the woods? Yeah. Seriously? What? Mike shrugged. We've talked about it 100 times. That was true. We had. Everyone in town knew about the old cemetery near the swamp, beyond the thin tree line and the overgrown trails. It hadn't been used in years. No one could explain exactly when it had closed or why. Some said it was shut down before the town expanded. Others claimed strangers had been buried there. Old people said stranger things, that they used to bury those who couldn't be laid to rest near ordinary people. Back then, it sounded like exactly what it was supposed to sound like. Drunk talk, village ghost stories, half-rotten rumors. But there was one thing that made even the people who liked to laugh avoid the subject. Whenever the cemetery came up seriously, something changed in their voices, a certain hurried irritation. It was as if they didn't just want to avoid talking about it. They wanted the place itself not to exist. "We'll go during the day," Jason said. "What's even supposed to happen?" "Maybe hobos," Mike said with a grin. "Or Satanists." "Or you in 10 years," Jason shot back. They laughed. I gave a weak smile, but no real amusement came with it. I already didn't like the idea. Not enough to argue, but enough for a familiar pulling feeling to start somewhere under my ribs. "Well," Mike looked at me, "don't tell me you're backing out." That settled it. I shrugged and said, "Fine, let's go." Now it seems to me that was the moment we crossed some invisible line. Not when we first saw the cemetery. Not when we climbed the fence. But right then, when we said that careless, stupid, "let's go." As if a bad place becomes harmless, just because you visit it in daylight and with friends. We left a little before noon. We had our phones, flashlights. Mike brought a folding knife he always carried more for image than use. Jason packed a power bank like we were going on some travel shoot, not walking into an abandoned graveyard. I pulled on an old jacket with a hood, and right at the edge of town, I almost suggested we turn back, blaming the cold. But I didn't. Past the last houses, the field began. In summer, there was tall grass there, but by autumn, everything looked as though the earth had been covered in a giant blanket of dead yellow stalks. Puddles blackened in the low spots, and wind-pushed leaves and scraps of dry weeds across the road. The track through the field led toward the tree line, a thin, ragged strip. The trees there stood unevenly, bare branches twisted like fingers locked in a cramp. At first, we walked quickly, still joking, kicking clods of dirt. But the farther we got from town, the less anyone said. It didn't happen all at once. At some point, I just realized nobody was laughing anymore. The field was empty, the tree line almost silent. There were no birds. That silence is what I remember most. Usually in places like that, something is always moving, rustling, cracking, creaking. Here it felt as if everything had stepped back and was waiting. When we entered the sparse woods, the air turned colder, not by a degree or two, colder in a different way. Wetter, heavier. It smelled not only of mud and bark, but also of stale water and rot. Underfoot lay a thick layer of old leaves, and our footsteps sounded muffled, as though the ground beneath them was soft and deep. Mike walked in front. Jason came behind him, still pulling out his phone now and then to film the trees, his boots, me, Mike's back. I told him to quit a couple of times, but he only smirked. "You'll see later how atmospheric this is." "You're deleting it afterward," I muttered. "Sure." The trail narrowed. Branches kept catching on our sleeves. Once I thought something brushed the back of my neck and I spun around. It was only a thin, wet branch, but my heart still lurched hard enough for Jason to notice. "You're scared already?" "I just hate this crap in my face." "Come on, we're not even there yet." He was right, and somehow that made it worse. The fence was the first thing we saw. At first it was only a dark line between the trunks. Then, separate rusty bars, crooked sections, concrete posts with peeling plaster, and finally the gate, hanging from a single hinge. It stood slightly open, as though somebody had passed through recently and never bothered to shut it. We stopped. For some reason, none of us spoke. The cemetery didn't reveal itself all at once, but in fragments. A leaning cross, the corner of a headstone, a section of collapsed fence to the left, an overgrown path winding between graves, the gray outline of a small chapel deeper in. It all looked like a place that had been dying for a very long time, and had now almost finished, but still clung to the habit of existing. "Well," Mike said quietly, We're here. Something in his voice sent a chill through me. In that silence, even ordinary words sounded out of place. The gate creaked faintly, maybe because of the wind, or maybe not. I didn't feel any wind then. Mike climbed over first, even though he could have gone through the opening. I guess he wanted to show he wasn't afraid. He stepped onto the lower bar, gripped the top, and swung a leg over. Jason slipped through the opening and lifted his phone, filming the cemetery from the inside. I hesitated, only for a second, maybe two, but I remember those seconds more clearly than almost anything else. The rusted fence stood in front of me, the graves beyond it. 2 steps and I'd be inside. And suddenly I had this childish, absurd feeling. As long as I was still outside, I could stop this. It wasn't too late. I could back out. Say I felt sick. Say I had something to do. Turn around and leave. But then I saw Jason already waving me in from the other side, and I stepped forward. Sometimes your life breaks on a single step. Inside was worse than outside. Old gravestones leaned in every direction. Some had sunk halfway into the earth. Others had chipped corners, their lettering worn down to gray scratches. In places, rusted grave borders stuck out of the ground like crooked teeth. There were almost no paths left, just smeared strips of crushed grass and leaves. The earth underfoot was uneven and soft. In some places it had caved in slightly, and I found myself avoiding those spots without really thinking about it. To the left, a cross lay across a grave, as if something had pushed it down slowly, patiently, instead of smashing it. Farther on, I noticed a depression in the ground beside an old headstone. Not deep, but enough to reveal a glint of wet darkness inside. I looked away quickly. Jason stopped joking. He was still filming, but in silence now. Mike kept turning his head, trying to act confident, but I could see he was tense too. Even the way he walked had changed, more careful. Man, Jason breathed at last, this place is insane. We kept going deeper. The farther we walked, the less trace of any order remained. There were no fresh footprints. Or maybe we just didn't notice them. Everything was covered in leaves, mud, and neglect. At some point I realized I could barely hear even our own steps anymore. The leaves under our feet didn't rustle so much as absorb the sound. My neck began to ache, whether from the cold or from the constant urge to look over my shoulder. And there really was a chapel in the center. Small, stone, roof caved in. The cross on top had long since vanished. The entrance had a half-rotten door hanging in place, and the side window had been smashed out. A pair of black branches hung over the ruins like dried arms. Well, Jason muttered, guess that's the main attraction. That was when I heard it for the first time. The sound was faint, so faint that at first I thought I'd imagined it. Something short and dragging, like a fingernail slowly scraped across wood. I held up a hand. Wait. They both froze. We listened. A few seconds. Nothing. Then again. Skrr. Clear this time. From inside the chapel. Did you hear that? I whispered. Mike nodded. The last trace of bravado was gone from his face. Is somebody in there? Jason asked quietly. Who? I said. Who would be in there? A hobo. Then why are they scratching around instead of coming out? Mike said. The logic of it, simple as it was, made my palms go cold. We moved closer. The door stood slightly open. Through the narrow gap, all you could see was thick darkness, even though outside it was day, gray as it was. It seemed to me something was drifting out of that darkness, a smell of damp rot and something else, something sweet and heavy. Maybe we shouldn't, I said. But I said it too quietly, and neither of them seemed to hear. Mike stepped up first. He put his fingers on the edge of the door and slowly pushed. The wood let out a long, sickening creak, and in the same instant, the scratching stopped, cut off so abruptly it felt as though Whatever had been making it knew we had arrived. Something cold seemed to pour through my insides. Jason aimed his phone light through the opening. Can't see anything. Turn on the flashlights, Mike said. We switched them on and stepped inside. The floor was buried under dirt, plaster, and rotten splinters. Where boards had once been, only black broken scraps remained. The walls were cracked from top to bottom. On one wall hung an old wooden icon, dark with age and almost indistinguishable beneath the grime. From the ceiling hung strips of something that looked like roots or damp packing fibers. And yes, there was a depression in the floor at the center, like part of it had sunk in. A shallow pit ringed with broken boards and stones. I shined my light into it. At first I saw rags. Then I realized they weren't just rags. Clothes, old, rotted, pressed into the dirt. And beneath them, bones. Not a complete skeleton. Scattered remains. An upper arm bone, ribs. Something that looked like a hand. And a skull half sunk in black, wet earth. Its empty sockets turned to the side. My stomach turned. Jesus, Jason breathed. That's real. He never finished. Because behind us, the door slammed. Not swung shut in a draft, not creaked inward, slammed, hard, heavy, with a sound like somebody outside had shoved it shut with all their strength. We spun around at once. The door was closed. For a second, none of us moved. Then Mike cursed and lunged for it. I saw his hand grab the handle. He yanked it once, twice, nothing. It's stuck. Pull harder, Jason shouted, and panic was already in his voice. Mike rammed a shoulder into it. The door didn't budge. It's the wind, Jason said too fast. The frames warped. It jammed. But he didn't believe it. He was talking to himself as much as to us. Then, the scratching started again. Only now it wasn't below us, and it wasn't behind the door. It was above. Slowly, very slowly, we lifted our heads. Something was perched on one of the remaining beams near the ceiling, in the gray strip of daylight coming through the broken roof. At first, my mind refused to understand what I was seeing. The shape was human and not human at the same time. A hunched, elongated body, limbs too thin, a head tilted at an angle no living neck could hold. The face, if it was a face, was pale and stretched, with hollows where the eyes should have been. No lids, no eyes. Just two black cavities. The mouth looked like a narrow crack, but when the thing shifted, I saw something white and small inside, too many little teeth. It was watching us, without blinking, barely moving. Only its fingers, long, bony fingers, scraped slowly across the beam. Skrr. That sound was what broke my mind completely. I don't remember who screamed first. Maybe Jason, maybe me. I only remember the flashlight beam shaking and jumping across the walls. Mike cursing as he threw himself at the door. Jason dropping his phone with a crack. And then the thing dropped. It didn't jump the way people or animals jump. It seemed to fold and detach and fall, all at once. Yet it was on the ground impossibly fast, faster than anything that size should have been able to move. A flash of motion, a gray, blurred body, the smell of damp rot, an impact. Mike never even had time to turn. The thing hit him from the side, and the two of them vanished into the dark corner by the wall. I heard a dull cry, the sound of bodies hitting wood, a splintering crack, and something like a wet, choking gasp. Jason was yelling. So was I. After that, everything became fractured. I remember only that the door suddenly gave way, maybe on its own. Maybe we hit it together. I burst outside, stumbled over the threshold, went down on one knee in the wet leaves, then scrambled up and ran. Jason was somewhere behind me. I could hear his voice, but not the words. I ran, through the graves, over the broken borders, past the leaning crosses. I ran as if fingers were already reaching for the back of my neck. Once my foot punched through a patch of soft earth, and I nearly went down. Once my jacket snagged on a rusty spike and I yanked so hard the fabric tore. I didn't look back, not once, because I knew if I looked back, something would change forever. I was already close to the gap in the fence when I heard Jason scream from somewhere to my right, not a shout, not swearing. The scream of someone who has just seen the impossible face to face. I turned in spite of myself, and I saw it. Something else was moving between the graves, low to the ground. It wasn't running or crawling. It lunged forward in broken jerks, grabbing at the earth and stones with its hands. Strips of dark clothing hung from it. Its head snapped from side to side like a broken doll's. Even at a distance, I could see one cheek was gone, exposing part of its jaw. Jason darted left, tripped over a low grave border, fell, and barely managed to scramble backward. The thing slammed into the iron, gave a wet clicking sound, and jerked toward him again. I should have kept running. I should have. Instead, I took 2 steps back. I still don't know why. Maybe because Jason was my friend. Maybe because I hadn't fully accepted yet that any of this was real. I grabbed a broken piece of an old wooden cross from the ground, more like a heavy club than anything else, and shouted something meaningless. The creature turned what was left of its face toward me. And in that instant, I understood the worst thing of all. It wasn't just some thing. Once, it had been a person. I struck it. I hit the shoulder or neck, I'm not sure. The wood cracked. The thing jerked, but not the way something jerks when it feels pain. More like a sack suddenly kicked aside. Jason got to his feet. We both bolted for the exit. The fence was right there. And then, from the direction of the chapel, a new sound rolled out. Not a scream, not a howl. Something between metal grinding and a human moan stretched too long. That sound nearly took my legs out from under me. It felt like the whole cemetery answered it with some dull internal echo. Several crows burst upward from the bare trees in a black explosion. Somewhere to the left, a rusted grave border shifted. And for just a moment, only a moment, maybe, I thought I saw the earth over 2 nearby graves move. We threw ourselves through the broken gap in the fence and into the woods beyond. Branches whipped our faces. Mud slid under our shoes. Jason was breathing hard and kept glancing back. At one point, he nearly fell, and I grabbed his sleeve. We crashed through the trees like animals fleeing a fire. When we finally burst out into the field, I was sure it was over. That feeling hit me so strongly, I almost slowed down. Ahead, I could already see the gray roofs of town, utility poles, fences, the old water tower, the normal world, the human one. A world without ruined chapels, empty eye sockets, and scratching sounds. That was when I realized Jason wasn't running beside me anymore. I turned sharply. He was gone. A second earlier, he had been there. I'd heard his ragged breathing, heard his shoes slapping through the mud. And suddenly, nothing. I spun around. Field, tree line behind me, gray sky. Jason! No answer. Jason! Only the wind, if it was wind because I hadn't felt any before, moving through the dead grass. Then I heard a phone sound. Very faint. From somewhere inside the woods. Not even a ringtone. Just the short digital ping of a notification. Ordinary, stupid. So absurd in that place that it chilled me more than any scream. I stared at the dark edge of the woods and knew one thing with terrible certainty. I would not go back. No matter what was still in there. No matter who. I wouldn't go back. That decision still comes to me in my worst dreams because it was there, in that field between the town and the woods, that I knowingly abandoned a friend for the first time in my life, and I ran. I reached the first houses barely aware of what I was doing. I didn't knock. I crashed into the nearest yard, terrified some old woman feeding chickens, shouted something about the cemetery, about a monster, about Jason and Mike. People grabbed me, sat me down on a bench, brought me water. I couldn't speak clearly. I was shaking so badly, the glass rattled against my teeth. Neighbors came, then others. Someone called the police. Someone called my parents. I remember faces, fragments of sentences, hands on my shoulders. I didn't fully come back to myself until evening when I was already home, wrapped in a blanket, and two officers were sitting at the kitchen table with my father. They asked where exactly we had gone, how many of us there were, what I had seen, whether we had taken anything, whether anyone else had been there. Homeless people, adults, hunters, dogs. I answered, and I could see from their faces that they didn't believe me, which was understandable. A 17-year-old kid, filthy, pale, jacket torn, babbling about a thing with no eyes in an abandoned cemetery. Even I would have assumed I was dealing with someone in shock if I'd heard it from the outside. But that didn't make it any easier. Mike and Jason didn't come back that night. The next morning, people went out there. Not just police, but local men, relatives, volunteers. I wasn't allowed to go, and I couldn't have anyway. My legs were still shaking. My stomach twisted at the thought of the tree line. Still, I waited. I waited for some kind of news. By evening, the rumors had already started. That they found tracks. That they found nothing. That Jason's phone had turned up, smashed near the fence. That part of the floor in the chapel had collapsed. That there were old remains inside. That Mike may have fallen into the pit. That maybe both boys had panicked and run another way. That it was only a matter of time. But they didn't find them that day, or the next week. After that, the cemetery was sealed off for good. They strung tape around it, blocked the trail, and eventually brought in machinery to dump earth across the route from the field. Officially, it was because of dangerous structural collapse and unstable old burial grounds. That's what they told everyone. That's what they posted in the county group online. That's how they explained it to anyone who asked. But a town like ours runs on rumor. Someone said one of the officers ended up in the hospital after inspecting the chapel. Someone else swore they'd heard gunshots out near the cemetery one night. There were whispers that they'd found not just bones, but old tunnels underground. Of course, none of it could be verified. Every attempt to ask adults about it ran into the same wall. You've already been through enough. Let it go. My parents started watching me as if I were 10 years old again. My mother was afraid to leave me home alone. My father acted calm, but I heard him checking the locks at night more than once. Heard him stop outside my room. Sometimes I thought he wanted to come in and ask, "Are you sure you're telling the truth? Are you sure there wasn't something else?" But he never did. For the first few weeks, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the chapel. I saw the beam near the ceiling, the empty sockets, heard the fingernails scraping wood. Then I'd jerk awake because a branch was scratching at the window. Or maybe I only thought it was. Then it got worse. Because one night I heard that sound when I was fully awake. It was late in November. Rain had been falling since evening, tapping against the sill. I lay there staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Everyone else in the house had gone to bed. And then, from the hallway, skrrr. Very soft. I froze. Then again. Skrrr. like something slowly dragging a nail across the front door. I don't know how long I lay there without breathing. A minute? 10? Then, the floorboards creaked in the hall. My father had heard it too. I listened as he walked to the door. Silence. Then, the lock clicked. The door opened a crack. He stood there for a long time. Then, he shut it, turned the lock, and went back to bed without saying a word. In the morning, I asked if there had been something outside. He looked at me too quickly and said, "Probably a cat." We hadn't had a cat in years. After that, the sound kept returning from time to time. Not often, always in a way that left room for doubt. At the window, outside wall, along the metal garage door. Once even at school when I stayed late in an empty corridor. The scratching was never loud, never obvious. That somehow made it worse. It was as if whatever it was didn't need to frighten me openly. It only needed to remind me it was there. In spring, I tried to go back to the cemetery, not inside, just near enough to see it from a distance, to prove to myself it still existed in the ordinary world beneath an ordinary sky, and there was no secret to it after all. I made it only to the edge of the field. My legs gave out. Not metaphorically, literally. My knees weakened, nausea rose into my throat, and my ears started ringing so hard I had to sit right there in the wet grass. Sitting there, I realized something strange. I could no longer remember Mike's face in the moment it was taken. I remembered his voice, his jacket, a gesture of his hand, but not his face. In exactly the same way, the last few seconds of Jason running beside me through the field had blurred too. It was as though my memory itself had ripped those pieces out, as though it was hiding something even from me. That thought haunted me. I started writing everything down. Every detail I could remember, in dates, fragments, sensations. Old conversations, rumors, the weather that day, the route across the field, even the model of Jason's phone. I felt that if I reconstructed everything down to the smallest detail, some hidden pattern would emerge. And the more I wrote, the more I kept returning to one question. Why did the chapel door open when I ran? Before that, we couldn't move it. Mike had pulled the handle, rammed it with his shoulder, and the door hadn't budged. Then, suddenly, it opened. On its own or not didn't matter. What mattered was when it happened. The exact moment the thing attacked. So had someone been holding it shut from outside or from inside? Or had it never wanted to keep all of us trapped at once? I went over that question for weeks, and it made me sick every time. Because if the thing could open the door, then it had never truly meant to keep us inside. It had only waited for the right moment, as if it knew panic would do the rest. By summer, people had almost stopped talking about the cemetery. The town found new subjects, fresh gossip, new disasters to chew on. Only the parents of Mike and Jason never stopped. I'd sometimes see them in the street. I'd see Jason's mother look at me a second too long, like she wanted to ask something people don't ask out loud. I saw Mike's father, who seemed somehow shorter afterward. It was unbearable to meet them, because deep down I knew I had run, and nothing could undo that. Then, at the end of August, an envelope arrived for me with no return address. Inside was a printed photograph, black and white, grainy, like it had been taken with an old camera or pulled from some bad video. It showed the three of us at the cemetery fence. Mike was already climbing over, Jason was inside, and I was still outside, caught in that exact instant of hesitation I remember so clearly. The photo was not taken by us, not from Jason's phone. The angle was different. Someone had been photographing us. On the back, in pencil, were two words, "Not the first." I read them 10 times before I understood what they meant. Then I looked at the photo again and again, trying to find anything else. But there was nothing beyond us, the fence, and the blurred shapes of the graves. I showed the picture to my father. He frowned, said it was some cruel joke, and told me we were going to the police. We did. They took the photo. I never saw it again. A few days later, the deputy told us there were no prints and no real leads. Ordinary paper. Ordinary printer. No cameras in that area. The envelope had been mailed from a neighboring county. That was the end of it. For me, it was only the beginning. Because not the first meant somebody knew more. Somebody knew about the cemetery, about us, perhaps about others. And worst of all, somebody had been watching. From then on, I stopped doubting entirely. What happened had not been a single isolated nightmare. People knew that place. Something about it had been kept hidden. Maybe for years, maybe for generations. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that the old stories in town had not been just stories. Eventually, I got one man to talk. Old Tom Ellis, who lived at the far edge of town near the road to the swamp. People said he'd drunk himself halfway to death after his wife passed, and now only remembered the things no one ought to remember. Usually he sat on his porch, smoking, squinting into the distance, barely answering greetings. But the evening I went to see him, he was more sober than usual. I showed him the place on a map without naming it. He looked at it a long time, then nodded. The old burial ground, he said. What about it? I was there. He looked at me then as if he were seeing me properly for the first time. Only one came back? Something inside me went cold. You know about that place? Tom stayed quiet for a while. Then he spat into the yard and said, I know exactly as much as I wish I didn't. I sat down on the step beside him. The evening was warm, but I felt chilled. Tell me. He gave a joyless little laugh. My grandfather wouldn't go there. Told my father not to. My father told me not to. Said the ground there was bad. What's that supposed to mean? Exactly what it sounds like. Not every patch of earth holds the dead the way it should. Some holds them badly. I said nothing. Tom continued on his own. Long ago, they buried the ones they didn't want near everybody else. Outsiders, suicides, wrong ones, people after whom houses turned bad. You ever hear that kind of thing? That's superstition. Superstition, he repeated evenly. Then people started disappearing. Not many at once. One man looking for a cow, a mushroom picker, then two boys, then someone else, and always nearby. Not right there, you understand, but close. Like the place calls first and then doesn't let everyone go. So what did people do? What do people always do when they're afraid of something they don't understand? They boarded up the chapel, moved some of the graves, filled in the old descent, brought in a priest, then another one, changed papers, put up a new fence. And what good did it do? He turned to me. If you really were there, forget it. I tried. You didn't try hard enough. After that, he said no more, no matter how much I asked. But it was enough to make me lose sleep again. The old descent. What descent? What exactly had they filled in? And why had he said, only one came back, as if he already knew that story? The following fall, exactly 1 year after that day, I made the decision that probably led me to the state I'm in now, writing all this. I decided to go back. Not with friends. Not in broad daylight for some stupid thrill. Prepared. With a flashlight, rope, camera, knife, a map of the area, a thermos, spare battery. I wanted to find the chapel, the pit, that descent if it existed. I wanted to find anything that could explain what happened to Mike and Jason, or at the very least prove that I hadn't lost my mind. For nearly 2 weeks, I prepared, and every day, I hoped I would get scared enough to change my mind. I didn't. The night before, I packed my backpack and left it by the door. My mother asked where I was going. I lied and said I had to head to the next town early in the morning. She nodded, but the way she looked at me almost made me tell her everything. I didn't. That night, I barely slept. And just before dawn, I heard it again outside my window. Skrrr. Not on the glass. On the outside wall of the house. Slow. Drawn out. Like a warning.